asked Henry Ford when he was done with the car, I don't think he would say with the Model T or the Model A. In fact, I'd say that Ford as a company says they're never done with the car, that they continue to improve, and although their iterations are long, they're 3 to 7 years, they iterate, right? So what we can say is the minimum marketable feature level of the car, well, that depends on who you ask, right? And that's a variable, and we market test to say if we're there yet. The current car is road legal. There's that. Apparently, it's not the minimum marketable feature. At least we're not marketing it correctly because we've only sold one. So we'll continue to iterate until the market says yes. But if you're saying what's the gap between us and a Ford Fiesta, man, there's a huge amount of interior gap. There's a huge amount of convenience, comfort, and security.
What kind of security? Security?
Door locks, remote entry, theft prevention, integration with GPS. The current Gen Fiesta has an option where it can GPS you its location. Brand new cars, which is what we're competing with, 2012, 2013 model cars, have some pretty awesome stuff that we don't have at all. So if your gap is the Ford Fiesta, and that's probably closer to what our target is for the comfy commuter car. When we say similar overall cost of ownership as a current economically minded commuter car, except far more efficiency, and similar level of convenience and comfort, well, that is what we're targeting, and it's large. Yeah, it's a big deal. Our seats right now don't recline, for example. We'll have to test a different seat structure. Our seats adjust fore and aft, and that's it. Many current commuter cars, even budget ones, adjust in height, forward, back, and recline. Some of them even have adjustable lumbar support in economy commuter cars now. So we would then need to test a seat and find a seat that's affordable in our volumes at that level, or make our own and then test it.
Is the race car right now safe?
Merchant, I sent you an email that took me a few hours to collect of data and evidence about that, and I never got a reply. Did you see that?
Was that the one regarding the frame? The one where I asked about the frame?
I think that was the start of the conversation, and then what I did is I included all of our safety data, and I sent over our finite element analysis solutions, and I sent over our crash testing videos, and I sent over our structural analysis and our engineering lookup tables, and I sent over all of our data, and I didn't get a reply back.
Without that, would you feel comfortable having somebody, if that is the product for Kickstarter, would that be legitimate at this point?
According to what we know, it looks like we have a wonderfully safe product. What this Kickstarter has dollars earmarked to do is repeat impact testing on our current generation and future generations of modules to have external verification. So I can say from internal data, yes, it looks fantastically safe, about as safe as automotive structures currently get. However, what I'd really like to do is have external verification, and that's part of the rationale for the Kickstarter.
What did Rob say about, he said that he's not comfortable about that car going out. He was referring particularly to the new one being worked on, or was he referring to the race car body?
I don't know. You'd probably need to ask Rob.
But you and I were there, and you both said that no, this is not safe right now. When I was with you guys, when I was in Seattle.
I don't recall what you're referring to, but what I could say is if the car doesn't have the new side crush modules attached, which are sitting in bay 4 but not bolted onto that chassis, that it wouldn't meet side impact crash requirements without that crush module attached. So that may be what have been referred to.
What about the race car? Is that without them and safe, or?
No, all models require crush zones attached. And the race car, well, the prototype, as it's sitting in Bay 1 right now, has trunk pans attached instead, which were put on for the auto show.
What are those?
Trunk liners, they hold grocery bags or golf club bags.
Okay, and what's the relationship of that to crash side impact?
They occupy the same space. So with side impact barriers, the trunks are incorporated in the side impact barriers. The show car didn't have side crush structures. Well, it did. Actually, they were built in carbon fiber. But we don't test carbon fiber because we want to change that for aesthetics. So it's highly likely that the car is actually even more safe than it appears now because of the energy absorptive characteristics of carbon fiber. However, we want to be able to change that body without recertifying the car. So when we performed physical crash testing, we used the aluminum underneath. And the aluminum trunk pans alone were not sufficient for the side impact test. It wouldn't have killed the occupant, but it wouldn't have been 5-star. And we hold ourselves to be always pursuing the highest threshold of crash safety. It was about as good as a 2010 or a 2012 Dodge Durango, which is a car sold now, but I wouldn't want to be in the side of that in a side impact either. I'd probably break my ribs. Same is true of that car without the current generation side crush structure. So the current generation of the car with all crush structures attached as it should be and as it always would be provided to a customer is, to our knowledge, about as safe as cars get. Much safer than some cars currently for sale that are certified road legal. However, we want to certify that from an external source, and that's part of what Kickstarter would be funding.
How long ago did you guys come up with the side crush structures? That's from before, or is that recent?
That's from the original design of the car. Now, it all iterates all the time. They're always increasing. But the car was designed from the beginning to have a chassis of a higher strength aluminum alloy and then softer crush structures that go from their yield strength to their fail strength before approaching the yield strength of the chassis.
Was that tested in the initial crash testing, the side impact structures?
No, I actually thought the chassis was going to be so strong that we could test it without side crush structures. We had side crush structures, but Brian Ford didn't put them on, despite being asked. He said he ran out of time. But I really thought that it was going to be 5-star from the side anyway. It wasn't. It didn't fail, but it wasn't. So the one shot, when we had about $1 million of DOE funds that could only be spent at Roush Engineering, at Roush Industries, and only on impact testing, we only had so much time. Brian Ford took our show car because he'd actually first agreed that he was going to build a whole new car to the current spec, but instead he took our show car, which was built very quickly and to aesthetic standards. And amazingly, even that car, built in a Rush and with MIG welding, an inferior welding system, still performed wonderfully well in the frontal impact test. In the side impact test, it didn't achieve a 0, but it did not achieve 5-star. They didn't give us a star ranking. But what we saw is about 4 inches of intrusion on the passenger side, similar to a 2012 Dodge Durango.
Aluminum MIG weld on that?
Correct.
Aaron, are you catching this?
Yeah, it's all being recorded.
Love it. This is very exciting. Now, I'm trying to fish for a solution that we can provide as the path that we stand behind. Do you think that we can, so what would you prefer as the most favorable path to something? What I would like to see is something for real that we deliver as this is an option you can take and buy or make yourself today. What would that be or today or whenever that depends on the timeline, the what by when. First is the what and by when. Those are both variables at this point that we can set, that we can define. What would you like to see, Joe?
Yeah, what I'd really like to see is a version of the car that doesn't require as many tools, that's even more simple. Many of the modules are extremely simple. However, some of them include vended parts. I'd like some of those vended parts to be replaced by parts that are more broadly available or can be made with very few tools. And some of the most complex parts that can be made, I'd like to see simplified. What I'd really like this to be is a car that someone could build even if they have an apartment without a garage, that they could legitimately put together about as difficult as IKEA furniture on the curbside while they paid the meter in front of their apartment, that would actually be possible. That's exactly where I'd like to take this.
I love it. Okay. Can we start specifying the implementation of that? So, do we want to do a frame with the corner joints?
And we definitely don't want welding for that scenario, right? So even as awesome as TIG welding can be, it's not a fit for that scenario. So we would want bolt together. Now, there's two methods of bolt together that I'm currently thinking about. There's more, but there's two. One that's been explored well by the video is bolt-on corner joints, and the other is, there's probably got to be a great word to describe it, but where the frame elements bolt together directly. So it's not a separate corner joint. It's almost like a log cabin. And both of those can be strong candidates.
Frame members.
I'd really like to.
Is that with no plates, just direct?
Frame elements, but but the technologies are frame elements bolting directly together, or corner joints that bolt.
Are both options explored in the video?
No, only corner joints are.
Is the direct bolting a concept, or is that documented anywhere, or is that innovation coming from Wikispeed?
Oh, I'm sure we could find evidence of it in other industries. In the auto industry, the way we're doing it is probably unique. And at this point, I think it's only sketches in one of my inventor's notebooks. So that would be at readiness level. I think on the readiness level 1 to 9 or something, it's 1. It's being explored.
Is that something to consider within the framework of this Kickstarter?
I don't think we pitch it in the video because we don't have anything graphical. But if we're talking about what we do with the Kickstarter, it's probably very relevant to creating the kit. So if the Kickstarter scope is, if we're funded at this level, we'll be able to provide you a kit. One of the things we would want to explore very early on to set direction would be that technology.
Okay, but for now, just I'd like to see a very narrow path that we promise as an explicit deliverable, and so we want to. Can we agree on a bolt-on corner joints or no? I'd like to get, as in this very brief time of discussion, like to see if we can narrow down things that we both feel comfortable about. That, I mean, there's so much in there to offer already that if we can guarantee that people get their hands on something substantially, and we can be very focused in our development effort, we are gonna rule.
Yeah, agreed, absolutely agreed. The trick is when we're talking about innovation, and you know this better than, well, at least as well as anybody on the planet, probably, Marcin, or pretty damn close, is once you have a proof of concept of a certain level, once you've gotten to a certain level, you can replicate and even almost promise that level, right? If it's different than what you're currently doing, it's innovation, and you can't commit. So if we commit to a kit and it's under, like we will provide a kit and what you're buying are the DVD plans or the printed plans for it, then we leave ourselves open to innovation. And if it turns out the direct coupling works wonderfully well and the plates don't when we actually perform physical crash testing with funds generated from Kickstarter, if we get funded, then we haven't closed the door on that or any other tech. So what I'm recommending is, if responsible, and when I chatted with Ian about it last night and this morning, he seemed to think it was responsible from his Kickstarter experience, but we're all relatively green to Kickstarter, and I'd love everybody's opinion. But he seemed to think that we could pitch it without being specific, with actually being very unspecific. That say, and we'll be able to provide a kit version of our current car, and you're buying the plans or the DVD. So in that case, we haven't even committed to the final cost of that product, because honestly, we don't know, because we haven't developed the kit yet. I've got hunches, but those could be proven wrong.
Valerie Morris, please call extension 2307. Valerie, extension 2307, please.
That was the work paging system. It seems to be done.
So I have a question. So Martin, for your Kickstarter that you were very successful at for the construction kit, you didn't actually, the Kickstarter rewards were not machined from the kit. There are more things like visiting open source ecology and educational tools, correct?
Correct. That's because the kits or the product kits of that would be pretty expensive. We're not
Right.
at the place where they're so hypermodular that you can put them together easily in a kit form. There's a bit of development to get there.
Right, and that was successful without promising a product. So I do agree with you, Joe, that it would be more successful if a kit for the car would be provided at a certain level. That would be ideal. But I don't know if it's necessarily something that needs to be at like every level, you know? There might be another way to
on that.
Go ahead.
What did you say?
Talk to him.
Okay, here's my take on that. I think that this project could be extremely successful. And by extremely, I mean $250,000. That would be extremely successful if we have a very explicit, real product. The difference between this and our Kickstarter is that not a lot of Silicon Valley people are looking for tractors. However,
Right.
a lot of them are looking for 100-mile-per-gallon cars. And in this case, we can really score off the charts, be perhaps one of the most successful Kickstarters on this planet in this case. That's the perspective I'm coming at it from.
How we would do that, to my knowledge, and I'm interested in innovating another method, so folks, please give more data that makes this not true. How we would do that, in my knowledge, is we would delay the Kickstarter, find some interim funding, and prototype the kit. So we'd prototype whatever the final product is, and we'd through some other funding method, develop one. Then we would have that specific product to say, and now you can have this. And the Kickstarter isn't financing R&D. The Kickstarter is who wants to acquire this. And that would probably give us the highest level of funding.
Okay, I see two avenues in that approach. So if we do the development right now, then the Kickstarter will basically be orders for a product. Now that will be accompanied by getting serious into production. The other way is when we allow for the room for R&D, that means people may pay more for what they're getting, but then we're not stuck in production, we're stuck in development, which is perhaps the better way to go from my point of view. Because I also look at it, I think I've seen a history of some projects on Kickstarter where they get so many orders that they're like buried in production and really are put under a lot of stress because they don't have the infrastructure to do that. I'd be careful about that part and keep it safe, as in, okay, we will produce a few kits, few of them, but we've got enough R&D and say facility expansion resource in that Kickstarter that we are able to manage the actual production that has to happen. That's how I look at it. Okay, but that's still that
point.
two valid options. Is, I mean, my knee-jerk reaction is the Kickstarter is there to help high-risk ventures. If we eliminate that by developing that, we're not really exercising the forte of a Kickstarter. That is.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because then if we're just promising a product, then it is like you said, Mark, you're basically just like an order form for people to buy the car.
Yeah.
And then all the money that you would raise would just go to making the products that you're giving to the people. So that's good because you're making cars that people are buying, but then again, we're not developing the next generation of car.
I think the majority of the funds should be going to rapid development on the outstanding things on an already awesome product. That's how I look at it.
I'd agree with you. So the way I see this currently is potentially two crowdfunding rounds. The first is the R&D. So while it's high risk, embracing the R&D, and unfortunately, that means our Kickstarter goals won't be quite as high. Now, who knows? Maybe we'll still get $250,000. Maybe we won't because the product isn't so clear because it's R&D. Then, once the product and we promise plans, we promise things that are inexpensive to distribute in whatever volume. So burn DVDs of the plans and printed full-size plans because we can charge more for that. So for people who want to pay more, we have a tier appropriate for them. And then t-shirts and bumper stickers. Then, after that's functional and people now have their plans, we say, help us launch the open source factory. Give us our first round of orders. And then we have a video that's the product, and we launch that. And launching the open source pipeline factory is where we have a higher funding goal because it's a higher capital expense. We're essentially acquiring the 15 machines or so from the GBCS that are required to run this factory from cradle to cradle and stand those up in a public way and produce those. And what people get are DVDs and floor plans of the factory, and then they have the option to buy the product. And where do we actually develop it? Because they're kickstarting our capacity to deliver those in volume. That sounds like a follow-on option to me. And initially, we promise items that we can deliver in volume, such as DVD kits, DVDs and blueprints, printed blueprints, and t-shirts and bumper stickers. And they're funding the R&D.
I would go for something like 10K for full kit minus engine, and that would give us, like the full kit would go probably 4K in parts, 4 or 5K in parts. The rest is R&D cash. I think, I think we have enough already that at the minimum we can offer something awesome. And is that true? Even if we do the race car body, that, as it is, we're saying we'd be reasonably comfortable putting out there?
Here's the trick with the race car body. It's expensive. And I don't mean the race car body, just by itself. The entire car currently is $14,500 in parts alone. And so if we say, here, help us kickstart the $25,000 car, we do have an ultra-efficient $25,000 car. If that's the type of thing we can kickstart, wonderful. But that's a fairly expensive Kickstarter proposition. $25,000 products in Kickstarter would be something that historically we don't have many evidence points of rampant success. $250 is the median contribution on Kickstarter. Statistically. Now that doesn't mean we can't be different. We are different. We're making motherfucking 100 mile per gallon cars. However, if we have a relevant price tier at the $250 level, that will probably be the majority. Not to mention, to Marchand's point, if we did put the car we have now, which is 25K, if we put the car we have now, and we did get 100 orders, we would then have to build the open source factory or build it up. Say we got 800 orders. Wow, holy wow, wouldn't that be huge? We would then have to build up the open source factory. If that's the case, maybe we should be kickstarting the open source factory with the product, but I'd rather be in R&D at this point.
Okay, what happened to my statement? Yes, 14.5K in parts. How about 6.5K in parts if it's minus engine, right?
Right? I'm not sure how many of those we'd be able to sell. I don't know. I don't have the market data. The closest analog we have is the kit car industry, which is a very different bunch than the Kickstarter crowd.
Right, and that's something that I'm thinking about too, is because what I was excited about talking about the CD3 is that I feel like that is a bridge for Wikispeed into a more mainstream audience, which is the Kickstarter crowd. And if we're selling kit cars, it might be a little bit more difficult to really amass a large amount of funds. That's why I was interested in pitching the C3 car in the first place, because that's something that's much more desirable for the general market as opposed to the kit car, which is going to be more specific to people on the fringe in this sustainability movement.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that's what the question, I guess, is like, can we pitch the C3 right now? I think that's kind of why you were asking how long the development time is for that product, right, Marcin? So it's something to think about. I think the C3 is very marketable. And the race car right now is very marketable to a smaller audience.
It's
But if we
absolutely
can't do it,
it's totally cool. I love that it exists, but it's a niche product. It's seriously considered by early adopters, which statistically is 2% of the population.
But 2% is huge. Is that?
I'm not sure that 2% uses Kickstarter yet.
Uh-huh.
but the other thing is that Marchin's, the construction kit was targeted at the exact same audience, the same market. It was, I mean, these people didn't get the machines, but it says right in our video, this is for early adopters and makers, that's a small 2%. And that project was funded on Kickstarter. So I don't know what that says then, because that was a successful fundraiser.
Yeah,
I think with something like the C3, you get 250K. I think with something like the kit car, you get more around 50K, realistically, the way I think that the market would work in Kickstarter.
I agree, or at least that's what the limited evidence I have seems to indicate, and that's what my gut says too. But my gut's been wrong before. Case in point, the faster we have the C3 and can commit to it with a price, the faster we have a product that will really be making a difference for a larger population in the world. And that's important, and that's worth doing. We should probably fund that. We should probably develop it. And it's doing that anyway. However, at our current pace of development, we're limited by materials costs. We're limited by machinery, materials, and person hours. Kickstarting something before the C3 to develop the C3 can accelerate that development.
What is the estimated cost of development for the C3?
$400K.
Can you break that down a little further into man hours, materials?
Yeah, it's a document actually that's been shared between you and I that I went through with you while you were out here. But off the top of my head, oh, I love it, C2, comfy commuter, but it's not yet a car. Yeah, I think right now we're at the C1. It's a car. It's not comfortable, and I'm not even sure you would really think of it as a commuter. So maybe we can add commuter car, and then we can make it comfy. But so the breakdown is crash testing is $10K per test. There's a minimum of 2 tests we would want to run. we'd want to run multiple iterations of test. And that 10K is before the cost to transport the car out there for testing, which is 5K. So for 5K plus 10K, you get a test, and then plus the cost of the car. Now you can crash a partial car and still be able to test the part that you wanted to test and have high correlation. It's a common practice in the automotive industry. So probably 5K worth of car. So 20K per test is likely responsible. If we say we want to run 10 iterations of testing, which would be very responsible when we're talking about a commuter car product, that's 200K there. There's a $30,000 machine that would escalate our ability to iterate.
What is that?
It's called the router mate.
Okay. We've got a good router quality torch table, a dual torch table / router that just came to factory farm about a week or two ago that would do the job, and the material cost is about $3,000. We can probably do.
Very interested, so maybe we can knock some costs down right there. What the router mate also lets us do is machine larger parts of the car at a time out of foam. But there's well, anyway, let me split this better, and let me check the cost. I think it's 75K. The other machine is it's called the Zytec CNC router, and what it is, it machines a car-sized thing at a time in one setup operation, and I believe it's 75K, but I'm going to find it.
That means just a larger work area?
It means faster iterations.
This is for CNC routing of foam?
Right, which is what we use for carbon fiber then. So our carbon fiber products start as foam, and our aluminum products start as, it's 59,000.
Man, we should really collaborate on it. What we have for the torch table is pretty high class. Currently it's a 5 by 10 working area.
Do you know its Z depth?
It's low, it's like 6 or 12 inches.
Which is fine for almost everything. That's awesome. What the Zytec allows us to do is it's 5-axis, so it can machine undercuts. And we don't have to have it, and there's a whole lot we can do without it, but it allows us to rapidly prototype almost anything that we're going to make in carbon, car-sized at a time. So it's something like 14 feet by 8 feet by 8 feet or something, and you put panels of foam in stacked up together, and you hit go, and it goes all around the work on an articulated arm. It's basically an industrial robot with a milling head that's on a track, on a gantry. And it'll do undercuts and cut side creases, and it's 59,000. When you're talking about rapidly prototyping all types of car-sized things, it's amazing. So that's a tool that would be helpful. Then there's hiring part-time and inexpensive full-time staff in that figure. And I'm gonna Wikispeed balance sheet. You can open this with me if you like, Marcin, because I'm pretty sure I shared it with you. It's called Wikispeed balance sheet, and it goes through the bill of material, the line cost, the car assembly steps, the initial budget.
Is that or is that a document you shared with me some long ago?
Yeah, so it should be in your Google Docs. It's Wikispeed balance sheet. Okay, so a fabric roll rack, spring lamps, more shelving. We don't need that. A engine dynamometer would allow us to do more rapid prototyping of our efficiency technologies, and that's $10,000. The good ones are $100,000, but we could get away with a crummy one to start with.
10K for a crummy one?
Yeah, 10K for a crummy one. There's basically, in aggregate, $125,000 in tooling that we'd like to have, that all are bent around increasing the rapidity of iterations, and also they're what allow us to start to enter a volume scenario because they're all more automated. Now, some of those, hopefully, well, actually, all of those are eventually in the GVCS. So one day, this is all just going to be GVCS as soon as it's appropriate, which is awesome to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Then we're adding staff figures and then credential testing. So impact testing, also airbag development is in that 400K figure.
Mm-hmm. So 200K in crash tests, 125K for equipment, that makes it 325K, so, and 75K balance for staff
And materials.
Okay.
Yeah, that's totally not enough. I think that figure before assumed that crash testing was going to be all provided by the Department of Energy, and it was, but we only got 2 tests out of that. Quick, sad story, and Martin, I think I may have told you this. It was about $1 million is what I understand. I never got to see the final figure of Department of Energy funding that our team got for finishing in the top 10 of the mainstream class of the X Prize. But we could only use it with Rouse Industries, and a certain portion had to be used from their safety department. So that was a waste stream. It had been pre-negotiated by Rouse Industries, so we didn't have a choice. So we didn't have market forces to solve the problem. They spent that entire bucket of money that was dedicated to impact testing on 2 tests. We later found out that during the process, we found out they contracted out the entire test. They didn't do any of it themselves, and that test was $10,000 per test. So now we have access to that lab at a much lower cost, but Roush billed, it looks like, an order of 2 magnitudes greater for that service to the Department of Energy. It sure sounds like it anyway. I don't have the hard figures to verify that, but that's what appears to have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we thought we were going to get tons of testing. Instead, we got 2 impacts. So that 200K figure for crash testing, I guess the actual gap then is closer to 600K to fund the C3 at the level where we're talking about something closer to a Ford Fiesta. Now, FYI, Roush quotes that cost as more than $1 million just to validate if what was already developed is compliant with current road legal regulations. So what Wikispeed has developed is a much less expensive process to evaluate vehicles for road legality.
And is that the connections there are key to that? 20K per test, basically like 10K for their services and 10K from our side?
Can you say that one more time, Martin? I'm sorry, I didn't follow.
So we've got a route to getting low-cost crash testing.
Right, that's part of how we're able to drive costs down.
That isn't specifically through because of the last set of connections, you can get that lower cost?
Right, in that case, yes. Most of it is because we brought the testing in-house, but it's currently cost-prohibitive for us to set up a crash test facility.
You
So,
can
like,
do crash testing in-house as well? You can get a certified facility, or?
Yes, we could. That would be a pretty big Kickstarter goal, though.
How much does that cost?
So there's a few ways to do it. The least expensive is a drop tower, and it's just a tower of a set height with a thick, like basically FAA aircraft thickness slab underneath, and then you put a deformable barrier on that slab, and then you drop the car into it. That's not credentialed, though. Labs will do that to get a high level of confidence as to performance very, very cheaply. When you're actually talking about a credentialed lab, it's mandated certain types of tech that we currently don't have the ability to reduce the cost of, or at least we'd have to research a whole lot into the process. We'd have to spend thousands of person hours to research the requirements so that we could solve them in a lesser expensive way. But the current state of the art is you go to one of these already past muster suppliers, and there's mounted tracks in the floor to tow the impact barrier at 45, 50, 55 miles per hour, depending on the test. and then you have, it's a waste stream where there's certain providers that already have done the legwork to say, look, we pass credential if you use our tool, and they're very expensive tools. So we would have to read the laws like we did for automotive testing. We'd have to read the laws for the impact testing facilities and understand them, and then innovate less expensive solutions like we did for the car testing itself.
Understanding that is basically, I mean, it's open source, but you have to take the time to research it.
Yeah, right. So the road legality standards for cars are all published in the FMVSS, the Federally Mandated Vehicle Safety Specifications. It's a huge document, and it took me about a year, well, not quite, a little less than a year, working on that full time as my project at work. So I was on a project where we were writing the titling and registration system for one of these 50 states, and I was on a team writing the rules engine for when someone hands a manufacturer's statement of origin or a previous title or registration over the counter at the Department of Motor Vehicles. How does the person behind the counter know that that was built by a road legal automotive manufacturer? And how do they know that that vehicle complies with the road legal requirements for overland transportation? And so I had to understand that document and then write the rules engine that walked the clerk through the process to determine if everything was correct and legal for them to issue a new registration and title. And that took it's like 9 months.
Is that a document available, or is that?
Yeah, that's published by the government. And
No, but your manual.
Oh, the rules engine? No, that's proprietary software that was sold to the Department of Motor Vehicles. Then what I did is I wrote a spreadsheet from what I'd learned, and I developed less expensive tests, and that's what launched our X Prize team. Well, that's one of the things. There's actually a whole bunch. There's also the fuel economy simulation. But the fact that I was unable to register myself as a credentialed automotive manufacturer because I had understood the process enough to be able to navigate it, that would have cost probably millions of dollars in very specifically talented and knowledge-based lawyer fees. And instead I was paid to do it as the new guy on that software project as part of a team.
So you're able to use that knowledge for Wikispeed.
Right. And that's what's allowed us to apply test-driven development to reduce the cost, because we had the tests. We had the FMVSS. So we could do that again for a crash testing facility, and ideally we would, because then we could very quickly iterate on the physical safety aspects. Right now the iterations are expensive and long. We send a car over to Indiana, which is $5,000 in transport fees, and then we wait for it to fit in their queue, which could be same day, it could be a couple months, and then they send back data in a few weeks. And a few weeks is really about as solid as it is. That's about as precise as it gets. So it's a much longer turnaround time.
Is the key to that cost reduction simply that you have the information, the manual in front of you, how to do that? Like the crash testing or the crash testing part.
By making the test cheap, we reduce cost of development. So, for example, Chrysler pays more than $1 million each time they validate a new model, each time they test a new model for if its lighting system is the correct FMVSS distribution. The light pattern on the floor and the height at which the light cutoff happens. They claim, or the person who is the manager of the Dodge Neon and Dodge Viper team for Chrysler said that test costs more than $1 million to run per car per time. Well, that FMVSS is published that says here's what the lights have to do. We put blue painter's tape on the floor at precise angles in relation to the headlight and across the wall for the cutoff, and turn on the light and see if it's within the bounds of that blue painter's tape. And if it's not, then we fail. And if we do, then we pass. So we've reduced the cost to run that test to a ridiculous degree.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think that this crash testing would be something that we should actually do at this time, or that's down the road?
At this time, I don't think it's financially feasible.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as we do, the pace of innovation will become even much more faster. One of the reasons Wikispeed is still on chassis version 1 is because it's so expensive to validate the safety, and we have been able to physically impact test that chassis. Once we can incorporate that in-house, even chassis could potentially be unique per car. The next car off the line could have a chassis that's completely unique to that user. Right now, the body modules can change easily, the suspension modules can change easily, the interior modules can change easily, even the engine module can change easily. But the chassis is expensive to change, and so are the crush structures. As soon as we have reduced the cost to run that test, those can iterate more quickly as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's responsible to pursue right now. I don't think we have the budget, is the only trick to that.
So 600K to get this commuter car off the ground. What timeline for 600K?
If 600K magically appeared, and
Yes.
so from the time that 600K poofs in the air, judging by our previous velocity, and then adding I didn't think of that, factor of 3, so multiplying that by 3, I'd say 18 months.
How much time of your time is required in there?
Yeah,
And do you have the time that's counting your availability?
right. Let me think through that, Merchant. I hope if we're funded at that level, we're attracting more volunteer interest as well. And hopefully we're able to replicate parts of what I bring to the project. But no, that's not assuming, that is assuming my time at no cost, which I'm not sure if that's responsible.
Do we have a backup plan? Or what does that do? If your time is not available, what does that do to 18 months and $600,000?
Right, that's a wonderful question, Marcin. What it does is, trivially, is it adds hold please, your call is very important to us. It adds it probably adds $135,000 to the cost, because at that I can probably work part-time fast enough to keep the rest of the team unblocked. So I'm not the bottleneck. It'd be 270K for me to not be for me to be fully available. That's ridiculous. I don't know how we'd raise $1 million that fast, and we're starting to approach the $1 million mark then. So I thought about it carefully just now, and thought I could potentially be half-time and likely contribute what I need to contribute while I'm pairing with other people and training them up on what I know, I hope, and still work half-time. So hopefully that's responsible. Looks like we lost Ian. That's too bad.
Let's see if I can call him again. I'm adding him.
Hello?
Ian, you got dropped off. You still with us, or?
I'm back.
Ian, do you need to still be with us? I love that you're on the phone, but I know you also, I don't know actually, you probably need to be filming the car rolling by. But if you can be on the call, that's wonderful. If you have to pull the chute, I respect that.
Yeah, Ian, if you got, go ahead, man.
We already shot the car rolling. I only have a few things left to shoot and organize. So I do want to, although like the past few details we were talking about for the past 20 minutes are important for me to hear, I do need to hear like what our consensus is at the end of the conversation.
Okay, Marcin and Aaron, what we could do is, Ian, you could just leave your phone hanging out there if you have enough charge and just put it on speaker and kind of go about your business. Or,
Yeah, I think I'll do that.
well, okay, and we'll call specifically once it appears there's consensus and reiterate it to make sure you're appraised.
Yeah, just get me back on the call when we're going to be talking about Kickstarter specifically.
Okay. About which?
All right,
Oh,
I'll
what
do that.
specifically?
The Kickstarter video, like our, you know.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
All right, great. Bye for now.
Bye for now. Yeah. So what do we want to do in this? Okay, so 600K gets to, what's the highest that Kickstarter ever got?
It's gone over $1 million for the iPod Nano in a watch and a few other projects like that.
Let's see.
Those are pretty extreme examples, though. I mean, we're absolutely in its outliers, far away from its median funding.
Yeah. But 600K is precedented.
Yes.
By how many projects? Let's see. I could check in with Barry and the crew, the founder, if what he suggests on this. 'Cause this is, or check in with Isaiah regarding this, what his recommended would be. But what is,
Oh, go ahead.
as far as the, I mean, what would you assess as the risk level for, so we're really talking about 600 plus 135, so 735K for this to succeed with low risk, you'd say, or high risk still?
High risk. The way, and here's what makes me say that. When I'm talking to venture capital, which I've not yet seen an agreement that was workable, but when talking with venture capital, they all say, that's great, I understand that that's probably what it'll take, but it always costs 3 times as much, so multiply it by 3. And so, I don't know. This is the first automotive company I've ever launched, Marcin. But
what do you gain from your prior experience on pulling together the first prototype and what that yielded? I mean, are we saying simply we're taking the existing work and we're putting on a different body to it? No, there's the doors, the opening doors and things. That's the difference. What is the main difference between the existing work and what we have to do?
Yeah, so it's the gap between this car and a Ford Fiesta, if we're talking about the C3. And that's an evolution, a significant evolution of the chassis, which is then a significant evolution of the side impact structures. And then that's a very different trunk system. And then that's a redesign of the interior, of the electronics integration, a redesign of the body, and a redesign of the electronic system in general, but that's actually already underway. A C3, well, it's not quite C3 level, but a pretty good electronic system is being prototyped currently in the shop. I think that's part of what's going on today. Latch seats, child seats in the back. If it's a 4-seat car, and it should be, because that's the majority of what the market buys, then it needs latch seats in the rear for child seating. So that needs to be developed and tested, of course, right? Last thing we want is a car bassinet breaking free under hard braking. The Yeah, it's essentially moving from proof of concept and prototype to for real's big kids stuff. And it's significant. Everything probably gets massaged. Everything probably gets changed. Everything probably goes through multiple iterations.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the market like? So regarding the kit car concept, that market is pretty low. Like, if you can get a replicable, relatively low cost kit car, the market for that is just not something that.
Let me be a little bit more clear. So the existing kit car industry means you get a set of plans and maybe you get a stack of metal, and then you place it correctly with fairly precise measurements. You weld it, you grind it, you drill it, you assemble it, you wire the electronics with crimping and heat gunning, heat connects, you do electrical testing, and then you install the engine yourself. So you're confident pulling and installing an engine and probably doing an engine rebuild. That's a subset of the population that has those skills, the space to do it, the tools to do it, and the time to do it. That's what limits it. When we're talking about a Wikispeed kit car, the market is then anyone with the place to change a tire, which is the size of a road, and the tools to change a tire, which is a wrench, which we can ship with the car. It now becomes more like IKEA furniture. So when we're talking about a Wikispeed kit, we're talking about a very different market segment. But that's when it includes all the modules. And right now the engine module is really expensive. So until we have a really efficient power cube to put in there, which we will, Merchant, and it's going to be awesome. I can't wait for the power cube team to say, we've got the 100 mile per gallon equivalent power cube. That will happen, and then Team Wikispeed will use it. Until then, we have something that's fairly expensive. We can call it a kit car, and we can send it as a kit, and people can assemble it on the curb in front of their apartment building like they're assembling an IKEA desk. That's awesome. We've got that part down. The trick is 14.5K in parts. Well, that's about the cost we'd want to sell it for if someone was going to build their own car. And there's no profit margin there, and there's no risk mitigation there at 14.5K.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the catch.
Mm-hmm.
So the kit car market is tiny because of the skills involved. When we're talking about a Wikispeed kit, it's now a huge market again, but we don't yet have the cost savings. That will have to be researched. That will have to be iterated on and found out. So we could sell our current car now as a kit, but even the parts are 14.5K. So a responsible kit price would be something like 19K, 20K, and honestly, I don't see the market for that being that big. No, I could be wrong.
20K for something that, I mean, what's the competition there? I mean, so the estimated MPG miles per gallon on the C3 car would be?
We'd be aiming for 100 and a 5-star crash rating. Those would be the minimum things for it to be a Wikispeed brand car.
So you're not talking about 90, it's going to have to be 100 plus?
If we find that during C3 development, look, it really can only do 79 miles per gallon unless we add another $9,000 worth of parts back into it. Like, if we can reduce the cost $9,000, but it only gets 79, then we'd strongly consider that business case. But the goals are absolutely 100 mile per gallon.
Mm-hmm.
The development target, I should say.
Mm-hmm. You don't think that at 20K, even if, well, at 20K you wouldn't sell? I mean, what is the competition? Nobody offers this.
Well, so here's where we are now. So what I'm saying there is, that's the current car, the current prototype, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are available now at 25K, and we've sold one. Mm-hmm. So I honestly, Marcin, I thought the day that we got our first test that this thing we built was 100 miles per gallon, I thought, wow, people are just going to start throwing gold bars at us It's going to be supermodels and rock star parties every night for the rest of our lives. This just happened. And it didn't. We did get on Popular Science, we did get in Popular Mechanics, we did get on the New York Times online. We had the Discovery Channel came and filmed us. Those things happened. That was huge. But people didn't buy the car yet. And the reason why is the comfort and convenience wasn't there yet, or at least that's what we keep hearing when we ask people. I get more than one email every day saying, I can't wait to buy your car. This is the most exciting thing I've ever seen. Only one of those people have ever bought the car. And when I ask each one of them, okay, I understand it doesn't meet your needs now, but could you be kind to let me know what the minimum feature set is, what the gap is between this and what you need? And they go, look, it needs to be weather tight and it needs to be heated. And the weather tight part is actually kind of tricky because that means we're sealing up the roof. And right now you step into the car because we don't have doors because of the side chassis. So that either means a flip top roof canopy thing, which would be awesome, but is not what 20% of the market is interested in. We're still only talking about 2% of the market. Or it means developing a new chassis technology with doors. And that's when we're talking about the C3. So we could distill it at the minimum and say, at the minimum, and we could call it the C2. We totally could. That's a chassis with doors that then we retest, we re-crash test, and we test and test and test until we have exactly the performance that we care about, 5-star. Nothing shorter than the highest bar. And then we create a weather-tight body, so there's a body iteration that's fully gasketed, because our current body is an open roof. In fact, the fender wells aren't even gasketed. So a fully gasketed body, so there's then a body iteration. And then we do a HVAC system iteration. Now we had a heating, ventilation, air conditioning, cooling, and defrost system in the car at the X Prize, and it worked. It's not what I want in my car. It was kind of bajankety. It worked. That's about the best I could say about it. So then there's an HVAC iteration. With those three things done, we probably have the C2. It's nothing like the current Ford Fiesta, which is 2012 cars are pretty amazing at their level of feature content. Refrigerated glove compartments, all kinds of ridiculous stuff. But it could be the C2, and it would require those 3 iterations at a minimum. And the first iteration, the chassis, is a fairly expensive one. And that's what I hope we're funding with this Kickstarter development.
Will you say that again, Joe?
That's what I hope we're funding with this Kickstarter development?
Yeah, what do you hope to fund with the Kickstarter?
Okay, so the minimum gap, as I understand it, to take advantage of the customers that already know about us, the potential customers.
Oh, that entire, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, chassis with doors, a weather-tight body, and HVAC. At least heat, but also probably air conditioning and defrost. And so those 3 items need to be iterated, and I hope those are, and we have versions of all of the above, but our current chassis doesn't have doors. You step in over the sidewell.
Yeah.
We took the HVAC out from the X Prize, and because it wasn't a good solution. It worked just barely. So we'd want to develop that.
Okay.
And then the weather-tight body is not too complex, but that means we're doing some real tests on the way those doors close. And we're probably doing some iterations to make sure the door seals and the flanges are appropriate and allow the locking mechanisms to work the way they do while getting splash tested and all that type. So there's some testing on all 3 of those fronts. And that's maybe what we could call the C2, because we're not yet talking about refrigerated glove boxes or all the other stuff that is cool and neat to have and available in other economy commuter cars now.
Are we deviating from the are we attempting to do something that is a compromise where we're actually compromising ourselves on both ways? Because I mean, I see one scenario, Joe, where like you could keep this proprietary, you've put all this work into it, and just make money selling these vehicles eventually. And if we try to make this like the OSE car, it seems to far exceed the OSE spec. Am I wrong in that, or are we I'm trying to like wrap my mind and get in there with you guys, but I keep getting stuck on this larger level issue, which just
Well,
seems like it's just very different than at least what I dream of when I'm seeing the OSE car, because it just is a
well,
very complicated design, and it's a great design and it serves a lot of good, but it just seems like
no, I think it's still, for us, it still meets or exceeds industry standards. I mean, that's our level of quality for what OSE spec says.
why do you
So-
want to make it open source though, Joe? I mean, is that really like the thing that serves you the best?
I don't believe in patent protection or the current IP system's effectiveness when we have manufacturing growth in countries that don't honor the artificial waste stream of the patent system anyway. It's irrelevant whether it's open source or not. All goods by default already, because of the current trade system, in my view, are open source, whether people acknowledge it as such or not. And to spend any money fighting someone's ability to copy your product
Wow, dude.
is not well spent. So that change has already happened, is my stance. Now, if we
That
push
change-
it in
hold
the
on,
open
Joe.
source,
Joe,
say again.
Joe, can you say that change has happened in the EU or in the world?
In the world is my stance. That's the symptoms of what I see in manufacturing and innovation as wholes globally, is that protected IP is no longer meaningful. So whether it's open source or not is irrelevant to your competitors. The only people you'll hurt by not being open source, in my view, are your customers, because they won't have access to self-service and they won't have access to innovate on your product and add to it if they have the will, the information, the passion to do so. So open sourcing the product doesn't hurt us at all from a business stance, because that's already happened. That train left the station. That train left the station shortly after Tiananmen Square. Then we're only hurting our ability to innovate quickly and establish a deep bond with our customers by not open sourcing, because they're the only ones that don't have the resource to reverse engineer and replicate our products.
Okay.
In the case of our collaboration, who owns the IP and under what license? Owner. There's going to be an owner. Well,
That's new to me, Martin. Are you thinking about like how to address the IP issue to protect the designs from someone else coming in and copywriting it like a troll?
well, I mean, if there's any legal action that does happen, there's the clarity on the ownership and the license is what is paramount.
Okay, this is the first I've heard about that ownership being in question. To date, everything Team Wikispeed makes is Team Wikispeed owns. That's the nature of owning a company. And as of yet, we don't have a GVCS product in our facility. And even if we did, we own a DeWalt chop saw, but DeWalt doesn't own our product. And to date, OSE team members that have designed or built part of the car have all been Team Wikispeed members. But if OSE desires the IP, then I'm a little bit confused, because it's in the public domain now anyway.
Okay. I think the question is the license, which is, if that's public domain, that's fine. That's that.
The license, as far as I'm concerned, is whatever OSE picks. You guys care about that deeply. What I care about is that my customers know how it works. Because my competitors already will.
Yeah.
So you have a value allegiance to the open ethic. I mean, Joe, is that one way to say it? Like you?
Yeah, that's actually probably the best way to say it, Aaron. Well said.
So then so it doesn't seem like you're compromising in your best interest by making it open source, because that's something that you value anyway. But Martin, it seems like there's is this specifically serving the development of an open source car that fits the OSE spec? Because 600, it just seems like a lot. It seems like much more complicated and complex and expensive than any of the other GVCS
When-
machines in development.
Well, I mean, that's
I'm not trying to
where
rain on your parade at all.
you talk
Just
about-
sorry.
If you talk about an isolated world, the 600K doesn't apply, but if you talk about being in public, that does apply. You see what I'm saying? If you're on public roads, you're required to have a certain amount of testing.
Okay.
Right. I mean, it's not that it costs 600K to develop it. There's significant regulatory costs involved in that figure.
I guess another way to say this, okay, your point is received, and I also would like to ask, like, as the iterations come down the pipeline, Joe, Wikispeed might have some kind of ideal that they're pursuing that is different than an ideal design for the OSE car. At some point, they might diverge.
That could happen.
Yeah.
And the way I see it is what Wikispeed desires to do, and I believe has done to a point, but I'd like to continue to iterate on it, is produce the car that matches the, what do I want to say, the use case of the GVCS, and allow the public domain, allow the open source community to iterate it.
Okay.
And Wikispeed will make items that continue to be compatible part of that project. So when we published our SGT01 chassis, it was that. That's a 14-piece chassis that could be made with the GVCS anywhere in the world. That's pretty exciting. I'm glad we published that. People could start making that, and they could decide if they wanted roofs or doors or whatever, however they wanted to do it. And that's available. And when I think of the GVCS car, I think of something that matches the GVCS, its current state. One day when the GVCS industrial robot has aesthetic considerations to it, then the car will probably have aesthetic considerations to it as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Until then, I think of it as absolutely function over form. That's my own idea. And what's cool about it is, since now it's open source, it's whatever the open source community thinks it should be. If they want to make enhancements to the wheels so they have spinners and put bigger subwoofers in it, that's not what I thought the world needed, but it's open source. They can do that and make it part of the design if it gets ratified.
All right,
And
thanks
that
for
when Wikispeed makes the race car Le Mans campaign version, which has nothing to do with the GVCS. I don't know, maybe it does. Maybe that's what everybody needs. Maybe that's what the world needs. I don't know. But whenever we make something that's completely divergent, that's fine. The open source community will just let us know by not iterating it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they vote with their time and their passion, and so I think it's self-selecting. But
evolution, yeah.
Yeah, but Aaron, let me try to get even more to what I think the spirit of your question was, if I got it right.
Okay.
Is when we're talking about the C3, the comfy commuter car, is that more complex than we need to be right now? And I'd say, yes, it is more complex than we need to be right now. That's why the SGT01 is already published. So that exists. There is an open source car now, which is wonderful to say. That prototype, that's been prototyped, and testing is ongoing. More data to come, and it will continue to come, and that will be awesome. But the open source community could already start stubbing that thing up or making it if they wanted to. The C3 is currently an idea more complex than Wikispeed is even funded to take on. So of course it sounds big for OSE spec. It's probably impractical for OSE spec right now. Once it's developed and simplified, it might make sense, and the open source community can choose to adopt it or not. So it's an opt-in model.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to think before I speak at this point, but I mean, thank you for entertaining my questions. If we're okay, well, I guess Marchand, if we're at this point where we've got, Joe has produced and Team Wikispeed has produced an open source car that we can fully document and release in a beta stage like the other machines. What's your interest in pursuing the rest of this path with Joe at this point? Is this a priority? And
That's a great question. Now, from our perspective, it would be.
Yeah,
I mean,
Aaron, that is a great
Yeah,
question.
that's a great question.
I mean, one answer is that we love working with you, but you have a pretty direct focus, Joe, at this point. So we can't ask you to like focus on the OSE specifically. It's got to be your baby, and you got to see it through what you're already doing.
I think I've got the right answer,
Okay.
actually, Aaron, and very savvy question. And that is, that car, that car that's published, the current OSE car that is in beta, relies on some fairly complex tools, not many, but some, like a TIG welder. That car relies on some vended components that only have single suppliers. The steering rack is from a 2006 or newer Honda Civic, and only one of the types of Honda Civic. It's specifically from the Honda Civic Hybrid. If that becomes scarcely available, that design has to grow up. What Wikispeed is doing right now, and what this Kickstarter gets to do, is replace some of the tool needs to make them more simple. It gets to replace some of the component needs to make them more broadly available or self-producible. We get to move the car closer to something that someone could make in front of the parking meter outside their apartment. Because right now it requires a shop or a micro factory. And although that's awesome, that factory farms can become an automotive manufacturer and produce these things in beta, as long as Honda keeps producing that compatible steering rack, what makes a whole lot more sense is for us to iterate the car, which happens to be closer to the C3 anyway, in terms of those components, so that it minimizes vended components, or at least creates a wider supply base for each, and it simplifies the tooling needs required. So it's items that are within the GVCS, and hopefully as few of those as responsible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one way that I can really like embrace this idea in my own thinking is that you guys are making this fit a higher level of the GVCS spec, and what this project is, it's actually just a really super advanced on the line of development for in comparison to the rest of the GVCS tools. But eventually they'll all be this well developed, and this much time, attention, and planning will go into each of the tools. This one just happens to be ahead of the pack. I mean,
as appropriate for their industry, right? Circuit mills aren't regulated to quite the same level currently. And one day they might be. but as appropriate for their industry.
So specifically
cool. All right.
to returning back to the Kickstarter, so it's 2 crash tests. So specifically, what are the items that we're trying to fund in the Kickstarter?
So the 50K minimum figure comes from let's be able to make an iteration, let's be able to fund an iteration and then publish that in open source. So exactly that. And an iteration that significantly affects safety features is 2 crash tests, 2 crash tests and a fuel economy test, and the parts to make another rev of the car is the materials costuming other parts of the car. So it doesn't, unfortunately, that 50K minimum doesn't even include any part-time or altruistically waged full-time employees. So it's still absolutely full volunteer pace. Hopefully we're overfunded. Hopefully we go past the 50K line. But what that lets me do is, right now, the GVCS car, I have high confidence in its safety. I don't want to put my high confidence on its safety. I want to put the NHTSA and IIHS's high confidence on its safety. And that's what this Kickstarter lets us do. It lets us credential to another level of formality the kit that's there, and in fact even a more advanced rev of it that's more simple.
Mm-hmm. So specifically, that's the existing frame as is, without the. Are we saying with the corner? We said yes, with the corner brackets, right? Or no?
It depends on how much dollars this thing raises, right? If we get funded and it's 51K, right? So we just crossed what I proposed as the minimum, 50K. then at that point we'll decide what the most responsible step is, and I hope together, Marcin and Aaron, but the goal will be that of Kickstarter, that we have a product, whether it's welded or riveted plates or bolt together chassis elements, but a kit that has a top tier safety rating from IIHS and NHTSA. That's the goal. Because right now there's a published kit, there's a published set of plans that don't have an IIHS or NHTSA endorsement. They don't have an EPA final fuel economy ranking. They have in-house projections of all of the above that I am confident of. What this Kickstarter does is apply industry standard credentials to that kit. And depending on the funding level, depends on how much more awesome it gets to be. If we get to try bolt-on plates, if we get to try direct link chassis modules, if we get to try a different method of connecting the emission system to the fueling system, whatever might make sense. But the minimum is that we have external verification of all claims that are being made internally right now.
And what's the, I don't understand, so what's the difference between that and a former crash testing? It was because it had a different body that this doesn't apply, or is the frame different than the initial model that was crash tested?
The initial crash testing, we didn't receive an NHTSA or IHS figure or ranking. What we received was data.
Oh, okay. Now is getting that data processed one way to go, or this is going to be specific where you take it to a crash test facility, take this to the crash test facility? Is there any point to use former data, or?
No, because we had on the frontal impact test, as I think you've seen the videos, I know I shared them with you, I'm not sure if you watched them or not. On the frontal impact test, the interior module, V2, had a weld failure on the seat mount. The chassis performed superbly. The seat mount had a catastrophic failure. So that test data doesn't give us any NHTSA or IHS ranking, because our dummy, I imagine that dummy died, smacking their head into the steering wheel because the seat broke free. Brian Ford knows about it. He did MIG welding instead of TIG welding on the seat mounts because that interior module was meant for the auto show circuit, not for customers and not for crash testing. And he chose not to take the time to build a new one for that test. So unfortunately, that's not a terribly useful test in terms of credentialing. It is an enormously useful test in terms of data, because we see the chassis performed exactly as expected, and the seat mounts had a welding failure. The weld didn't fully penetrate, which is easier to do with MIG. TIG is easier to certify. We've added a bolt-on plate to address that anyway. So now a weld failure is not a catastrophic failure in the seat mount anyway. Then the side impact test, again, we had a MIG weld failure, and we've increased we developed a new side impact module in addition, which was not present at that test.
Yeah, and now just returning back to this thing of fatigue, I mean, what is the industry standard for assessing that?
Yeah, that's why welding can be certified. That's why welders have a certification process, and you have a certified welder, and they can say, I have been trained to the point that I have been certified to be able to certify this weld, and say it will hold for at X spec. And TIG welded aluminum, and actually even MIG welded when it's certified correctly, is common practice for the transportation industry. And by that I mean for rail and aerospace.
And what about those, once again, the discussions, some of the discussions that arose from critics that said that about it's one thing to pass the crash test, but another thing for the car to stand up due to metal fatigue and so forth? I mean, do we have any way to address that?
We have the data on, so let me be clear on my preference. As mentioned, maybe I'm phrasing this wrong, Marcin. I don't want to use TIG welds not for safety reasons. I don't want to use TIG welds for complexity reasons, and because there's not a TIG welder in the GVCS. So I'm moving away from TIG welds anyway, and I'm not sure if that addresses your concern.
Yeah,
But
okay.
to your point, if we were defending TIG welds, which is a bit moot because I'm moving away from them anyway, but if we were to defend TIG welds, it's that we have credentialed or certified data on what causes failure in different metallics, and that's why you have certified welders. And that's why welds are able to be used for things like high pressure vessels. They're able to be used on Boeing aircraft. They're able to be used on the rail industry.
Okay.
I think that brings up the other issue that we're trying to learn is like how do we review things? Because
And
some
that's what
guys,
I'm
some
saying
guys,
is, in this case, we let the IHS and NHTSA review it for us.
okay.
If there is not the money to do the non-welded joints, what happens? Do we want to get it, make sure that goes in there, or do the test without that? So you're planning on a test with the corner brackets?
So here's my plan, and Marcin, as you know, I'm agile. I delay commitment to the last responsible moment. So this plan completely depends on what our funding level is, if Kickstarter takes it all, etc. But assuming Kickstarter takes, right, which is probably likely, it looks like Ian's making a kick-ass video, and that's most of the battle. So assuming Kickstarter takes, I have no desire to crash test another welded chassis, because that would be working with legacy tech. Since the GVCS doesn't include a TIG welder, and because TIG welding is a complex art, if we're paying to crash test another chassis, it should be something that's more state of the art. And so in my mind, that would be bolted bolted chassis elements and chassis plates. I think the chassis plates are actually probably one of the ultimate solutions, and I imagine the final solution will be a blend of both. But say the Kickstarter doesn't take and we go to Indiegogo or one of those where we keep the funds and we publish it again and we get like 20K, and so we can do one crash test and we don't have money for materials. Well, we'll at least crash test something, and maybe it has to be TIG. I don't know. But
Yeah.
to be clear on my plan and my preference, I have no intent or desire to do further testing on a TIG welded chassis, not out of safety concerns, but because of complexity of manufacture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
And the energy consumption is huge. So much of what Team Wikispeed uses right now could be run off a water wheel, or could be run off low amperage solar, except the welding. The welding is by far and away our highest power draw. And then if we're doing stress relieving after the welding, that's another very large power draw, larger than any other part of the process.
Yeah.
So in terms of green and sustainability, it makes sense to get the fuck away from welding as soon as responsible.
Yeah, but not to beat a dead horse here, but the Universal Welder open source is part of the set, though. So it's in there.
Damn it.
All right.
Man, okay. Well,
Okay.
Fine.
All right. Well, that sounds good. So,
Oh, that's what it is, that there's not yet an argon gas collector, I think is what it is.
Yeah.
And so we wouldn't be able to have a self-sustaining settlement doing TIG welding yet. They could do stick welding, and they might be able to do MIG. But until we have an argon gas collector, we'd still be relying on vended products in the existing supply stream, which is not the goal.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah. Okay. So I would say, we should probably brand it together like OSE and Wikispeed. Do you feel good about that, or?
I have zero preference. What the driving decision maker is for me is which is more likely to increase fundability, because that's what ultimately serves both of our projects here.
Yeah.
And I don't know which is better. I don't have, my gut tells me that, and I haven't looked at your website metrics, but my gut tells me that OSE has a far wider reach in awareness than Wikispeed does, and that's based on TED video hits, yeah, actually, in fact, that's all that's based on is TED video hits. So I believe that that's a value add. The only question then is it confusing for people to see two brand names to the point that it decreases anyone's likelihood of funding? I kind of doubt that. My gut says the most responsible is to co-brand this. However, I don't have real data. That's based on my gut, which is based on one evidence point, which is TED video hits.
Well, I get asked a lot in the grants that I work on, like, I mean, basically they think it's a great thing that we have collaborators and we develop partnerships with other organizations. So that would work in our favor to say that we have working partnerships and that's going to increase our fundability. The one drawback for OSE is we have a finite number of Kickstarters we can do, but this directly serves our project, so that's not really a problem. It's just
Well,
we
does
should consider
co-branding count against your Kickstarter count?
I mean, I think in reality we have a finite number of times that we can go to the OSE community and ask them to support a Kickstarter campaign. But this directly
and
serves.
that tees up to my next question, which is co-branding, if the OSE community isn't solicited, is non-effective. And so it's, I guess essentially, is this the type of thing that OSE is willing to go to bat to aggressively co-promote? And if so, then
Totally.
it makes much more sense for it to be co-branded so people understand the connection.
If I were making the call, I would say let's green light it and do it together. I just wanted to throw that out there because I hadn't heard it said, and it's.
Yeah, no, it's very important. I had no idea there was any type of limit, so we should.
I don't know objectively, but I'm just guessing that we.
I mean, it's just donor fatigue. That's all.
Yeah.
Right.
That's one way to put it.
Right. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. In fact, we would probably want to, from both of our communities, establish a set of ringers that have agreed to advance to bid on certain dates, and that are willing to bid again towards the end of the project if it's near its funding goal but not there. And that's the type of strategy that we can do when we have a community.
Interesting.
Yeah. And just on the general concept of the car, so the developments on this would that be the chassis with the doors or without?
It all depends on what we can fund. If we're barely funded, if we get 51K, we'd probably be prototyping a new chassis bonding technology. So riveted plates or bolted plates or bolted interior elements. And we won't be able to pay to have someone develop a different door tech. So it depends if the existing volunteers have feats of enlightenment and are able to do it. So, man, that would be the ideal, Marcin, because that's the important thing to increase market availability, and it's prioritized as such, and it just depends on financial constraints. I completely agree, because I think that's where you're going in terms of priority, but we can only do what we have dollars to do, and we'll see.
Yeah. So case scenario for 50K would be do the bolted joints when there's much more, then you do the door modules as well. But if not, you crash test on that basic improvement, or don't do crash testing at all and go for the doors.
So once we know the funding level is when we can know the answer. What my gut tells me is that we'd find a way to put doors in there, because it'd be so wasteful to conduct another round of crash testing when it's not a candidate chassis for the C3. But we'll see. We'll work in the constraints we have. I think we're on the same page as to what the ideal is, and my gut tells me that we'll figure out a way to do it, to have doors in there.
And otherwise, the old So exactly what is the status of the old frame that has been crash tested? That is right now, but it's a step over thing without doors. That can be used as is.
Correct. Based on internal team data. And so wouldn't it be nice to have that externally verified? But if we're going to externally verify that, let's verify the new model. Let's upgrade it.
Let's see, but the five-star crash rating that applies to equivalence.
The crash rating equivalency. That's in-team assessment. We've built to the standards, and our in-team data says it meets them. And we can't wait for the IHS and NHTSA to give their rating. And we believe that that's exactly what we'll get.
So the equivalency means the data obtained from that crash test before? That's just data, but not that approval, let's say. Is that the way to talk about that correctly?
Let me be even more clear, because we're really close. Because in that data, on the frontal crash test, we had a seat mount failure. The frame performed wonderfully. The front crush structure performed wonderfully. We then upgraded the seat mount. Then the side impact test wasn't 5-star. It does not appear to have been lethal, and so it wouldn't have been 0, right? But it wasn't 5. So we upgraded the side crush elements. So from that test, we didn't do very well. We had a seat mount failure and the side buckled. With the version now, which is post-crash test, from what we learned in the crash test, we have confidence in team that we've achieved 5-star crash rating equivalency.
Is the prior result street legal? Like, can you fabricate, manufacture that and
Yeah, you can drive a death trap around, but our goal is the highest level of crash safety.
Yeah. If you were to sell a death trap, that's legal?
Yeah, it's perfectly legal as long as you're transparent about the safety data you've done. Now, there's FMVSS you have to meet that are minimum legal specs. So there's some things that have to be present, like the type of door lock you use and the shape of the lighting pattern. And they're based around safety, but you can still have the car be completely lethal and comply with all FMVSS, as some cars made today are. And as evidenced by their IHS and NHTSA crash ratings that are very, very low. And that is legal. And the consumers know, because that's all public data. If they choose to buy a Lotus Exige or a Lotus Elise, they know they're making a trade-off. They have an extremely nimble sports vehicle in exchange for the fact that there's very little crash protection.
Yeah. Okay.
And in fact, just so you know, not to belabor the point, but companies can actually apply for waivers of FMVSS requirements and not have them. So you can kind of buy your way out of even more of those, which Ferrari does regularly.
Yeah. Yeah. So as far as back on the script, getting to the script, does Ian have what he needs and all that? Do you guys have enough to go on?
My understanding, and it'll be awesome to ask Ian back for the last 5 minutes, but my understanding is Ian's rocked. He's in editing now. It's kicking ass.
Ian.
Hello.
Hi, Ian. Last 5 minutes. Talk to us about the script.
What did you say?
Tell us, so you've got a script written up and all that, or what's it?
Well, I don't have a script written up now. I have an interview that I did with Joe, in which we hit on all the subjects that we're going to include in the video, and then the script is basically what is Wikispeed, what have they been working on, what's the story there really briefly, and then there's a problem statement, which we're figuring out right now. We need money for this particular reason, and then it ends with, if you give us money, we're going to put it to this, and then we'll be successful and create this product.
And in that, are you mentioning OSE in there?
Well, I wanted to know if that's what we should do. I don't know if we're going to brand them together.
He asked me interview questions related to OSE, so he's got that raw footage, and it's up to you, Marcin. And I think we came to a consensus, but it'd be great if you just told Ian directly, that way it's known.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When are you editing that? When do I have to give you an answer?
I'm editing over the next 3 days.
Okay.
Pretty much wrapped up shooting right now.
I think.
I mean, I can, if we want to push it further, we can push it further, but we were planning on, I think Joe was interested in, or I know that Joe is interested in launching a Kickstarter on Earth Day, which is coming up on the 22nd.
22nd?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Oh yeah, that's a few days. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think we should include branded as common to both projects, and which means our responsibility to publicize and all that and get more resources to it. I think that's a good idea. I need to check in with a person like Isaiah to approve that or have just feedback on that. So I'd like to do that, and I'll get back to you like tomorrow or as soon as I hear from him. Should be. But right now, does my answer determine how you edit right now, or like until?
I can start editing it without that. What it'll be is it will affect what I cut, yeah, definitely, because I need to cut in his voice saying we're working with open source ecology, and then I'd probably show some stuff about open source ecology within that first minute, and it would be about, I focus more on open source ecology significantly, because it would be telling that story along with the Wikispeed story equally.
Ian, that might complicate it when the video is as short as it is, because they'll be like, wait, am I buying a tractor, or am I buying a bread oven, or am I buying a car? And the answer is yes, you're funding the open source revolution, right? But I imagine the branding is, the intro screen is the open source ecology logo with Wikispeed worked in, which is something we talked to the ninja who made that logo about. And then somewhere it says, as part of the open source ecology movement, we are building an ultra efficient car. And so maybe you need to record me or Rob Beresford or Kuhn saying that, or yourself, or Marcin saying that. But if you try to tell the open source ecology story in that video, I mean, you would know, you're the camera dude, but my thought is that would be challenging.
Yeah. Ian, you don't have any, how much of the script have you written? Nothing yet?
I mean, I'm not writing the script. I'm shooting an interview, and I'm cutting that into, with the footage that I have. We have like an outline of what the video is going to be. Okay.
All right. Yeah. You didn't try talking to Isaiah about any of that, have you? Or?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I want to check in what he says, because he typically has good advice that's strategic for how to pitch it. So I just want to check in with him and get back to you on his feedback. But otherwise, I guess go as you're going. What you said sounds good to me.
Yeah, well, okay, so that's the main reason why I don't have a script at this point is because we don't know, I haven't clarified what we're selling. So what have you guys decided on?
Joe?
My understanding of what has transpired over the last 1 hour and 59 minutes is that Kickstarter is pitching, Wikispeed is developing a comfortable commuter car. These funds move us towards it, and then in exchange you get this stuff from the prize tiers, which is not part of the video, which is great, because then we can change that up until Earth Day. But my understanding is that that's going to be a DVD and plans of the OSE kit.
Okay.
And at that point you call it OSE kit, not Wikispeed kit?
Oh, you tell me, Marcin. But I figure that's the point of the co-branding, is that it's the GVCS car. It's the plans for it.
Okay.
The current version, you know, it always upgrades just like every item in the GVCS.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, so that's,
Holy shit, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I was saying that's clear to me then. Stuff I know that I'm selling the C3, then
You're selling development of the C3, right? Because depending on the amount, we might not get all the way there, but we're moving towards it. It's helped growing this from these cool, ultra efficient prototypes towards stuff that your grandma is going to drive to work in, or or could be your first car out of high school. Legitimately that, and in all weather and in many terrains. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so what's cool is we don't have to guarantee it, right? Because fuck if I know. But we're moving towards it, and they're saying I'm on board with that. That's something I want to exist in my world, and your video makes them want to be on board with it. They want to be part of this club.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. That sounds good. Aaron, any final comments?
Joe,
Yeah, that's clear to me, then.
Joe, I had a quick question. Can you hang on for like 1 minute? It'll be really brief.
Oh God. Yeah. I don't.
I'll just follow you. I'll follow up with an email. It's fine. There's not a rush on it. Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, is it okay? Sure. All right. I'll look for that then.
All right.
Gentlemen, much obliged. It's been 2 hours and 1 minute of, well, useful conversation. So glad we got to it. Ian, I'm glad you're unblocked. Thank you very much. The work that you're doing, I think, is going to be transformative, and I think it's going to kick a lot of ass. So thanks. And I'm looking forward to seeing this video win one of the categories at Canes next year.
Huh?
So,
The Kickstarter video category, yeah.
Yeah, there's going to be next year, because they're going to see this and say, fuck, we've been missing out on the most important development in filmography to date.
Mm-hmm.
After they see your film.
Given a little sprinkle of profanity in there, can we still publish this on the blog?
Yeah.
Sorry, okay.
Oh, God. Sure, I don't remember.
No, you just mentioned the F word a couple of times.
Well, can someone else say it besides me, so it's not just me then?
No way. It's about image.
Thanks, Aaron. I think you said it. I'm not sure.
All right. All right.
Great.
That's excellent. Thank you. So we'll be in touch on this, yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, thanks, guys.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you, Ian. Hey, Aaron, how are you doing there?
I'm good, man.
Did you get the recording?
Yeah, I'm gonna stop the recording now.